That's CPD Show. My name is Chris Bright and I'll be your host for today. And today I'm joined on the island by Pastor Glyn Barrett. In September 2007, Glyn and Sophia pioneered Audacious Church, an AoG church in central Manchester. It's grown from 50 people in a backstreet warehouse into a multi-site, multi-generational church of 7 locations, 3 in and around Manchester, plus Chester, Cardiff, Sheffield and Geneva. Their central location has an active congregation of 4,000 people, and they're currently about to break ground on a new purpose-built church facility, which will include within it a 2,500-seater auditorium. A powerful and sought-after communicator, Glyn's preaching and inspirational teaching continue to challenge and grow people of all generations throughout the world. He's been a regular speaker at many of the AoG conferences around the globe and continuously helps leaders break growth barriers in churches of all sizes. He also has strong connections with some of the most influential church movements and ministries in the world, with many of them included in his friendship circle. Married to Sophia for 28 years, they have 2 children, Georgia and Jaden. Glyn is passionate about Assemblies of God and the church as a whole in the UK, and always seeks to champion local leaders to become all they can be. He is also currently studying for a doctorate in leadership and global perspectives, recognizing the ongoing need in himself to grow and develop. Pastor Glyn, it's great to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Chris, great to be with you. Hello to everybody out there listening.
Brilliant. And can I just say an epic bio of epic proportions. So fantastic. It's really great.
I definitely need to give somebody in the media team a pay rise for that bio. It's amazing.
No, very, very good. Really good and great to hear about all that you've done and continue to do. And I'm firstly, staggered that you're leading in all these areas and studying for a doctorate at the same time, which I think is incredible. I don't know how you manage to balance your time. It's absolutely, fantastic.
Yeah, thanks. I think there's definitely a sense where all my margins are squeezed at the moment, but it's definitely a productive life. So I'm loving it, actually.
Fantastic. Well, we're here to talk about your 3 favorite resources that have been really sort of developmental for you. But before we do that, of course, this is a desert island. I always say this virtually every episode. It's not a desert island. We don't want desert islands. We want desert islands. It's way better. So we're going to talk about your favorite dessert. So do you want to introduce us to your favorite dessert?
Okay, well, listen, I do have a sweet tooth, but definitely my favorite dessert of all time has got to be banoffee pie. The combination of the biscuit base with some golden syrup and butter in there, with caramel, not caramel out of the tin, but caramel that you cook up from the condensed milk, and then with a layer of bananas, a layer of cream, a layer of bananas, and a sprinkling of chocolate is just absolutely the best. And it's something that I make for our family actually every Christmas. So if you talk to my family, my friends, my team, they'll definitely say, I hope they would say that one of the highlights is definitely the banoffee pie that Dad makes once a year.
Yeah, I'm glad you said about the condensed milk caramel, because the cooking it from the condensed milk, I mean, I've never done this personally myself, but I've had it from, the proper stuff. When you make it from condensed milk, it really does make the difference. That's what I've certainly seen.
It's just so sweet when you do it that way, and the color's perfect, the texture's amazing. So what you do is you boil a pan, you bring the pan to a place where it's simmering, then you put in the cans of condensed milk and you cover it up and you simmer it for 1 hour. And then once it's done, you then take it off the boil, you take the cans out with some tongs, make sure you cover it up, wait about half an hour, and then open the cans. Now, it's really important at this stage that you do it while you're covering it with a tea towel, because I have on a few occasions opened a can and it's exploded and hot caramel's gone everywhere. So make sure you put the tea towel over the top, and it's just the perfect way to cook the perfect caramel.
Oh, very, very good. And do you have it with anything? Is there an accompaniment? Would you have it with cream or ice cream, or is it just on its own?
You know what? It's so rich and so sweet. I would suggest you don't have it with cream or anything. It's almost like in a restaurant. If you ask the waiter for some ketchup, when you're in a nice restaurant, that's like an insult to the chef, isn't it? No, just pure as it is, and it's definitely Moorish, and it'll definitely ruin any healthy eating plan you've got.
Absolutely, but maybe it's absolutely worth running it for a really, really good banoffee pie. I can certainly get on board with that for sure. Well, that's a great dessert to start off with. Should we move on to your first resource? What's the first resource that you brought with you?
Yeah, well, my first resource is by Gordon Fee and Douglas Stewart. And there's actually two books in the series. The first one is called How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth. And then the second one, the sequel, How to Read the Bible Book by Book. And the whole idea with this book and why I find it really brilliant is because it helps anybody really at any age, whether you're a preacher or just, a fairly new Christian wanting to understand how to read and apply the Bible. It certainly does break down the principles of both exegesis and hermeneutics to make it possible for, somebody to actually better understand the Bible and apply it to their lives. I would say it should definitely be a must read for all preachers, all Christian communicators out there, but definitely something that I think every Christian should actually read, and pastors should, I think, be very keen to have their disciples in the church, congregants in the church, to read the books. They're actually really, really very good for that.
Yeah, I've read most of this book just before starting my master's course with Missy O'Day. It was one of the kind of recommended readings, so I read as much of it as I could before starting the course, and really loved how it explained the difference between so hermeneutics on one side and actually sort of digging into the text and doing an exegesis on the passage. And how has it sort of affected how you maybe do preaching? What's the sort of the actual, the tangible, how it's changed your process maybe? How has it helped you? What are some ways that you've maybe changed your process?
Well, it definitely helps me in my own sort of my daily Bible reading plans. It definitely helps me with my sermon preparation. And it also helps me in terms of listening to other preachers or other Christians who are coming to me with an argument in defense of something that they believe. I think one of the challenges that we have in the year that we're living in is we're living in a time where it seems to be that Christians are, in many senses, more illiterate now than maybe they've been in the last sort of 30, 40, 50 years because of the social media generation and digital generation. We're listening to and absorbing more and believing stuff more than maybe we should do from a point of view critical thinking. So it helps me because what it does is when I first read it, gosh, maybe 2 decades ago now, and certainly began to go through the process of understanding hermeneutics, exegesis, and even homiletics, which is sermon preparation, it helped me to naturally think, okay, exegesis, why was this written to the original audience in the first place? Why was the Apostle Paul writing this? Why was Peter saying these words? What was the situation, the occasion that it was, being addressed at that time? That's the exegesis, and the hermeneutics is how do we then apply those principles to today? Case in point, Paul says to Timothy to not allow women to speak in church. So what do we do with that? How do we understand that in the day that we live in? Do we forbid women to speak in churches today? And the majority of us will say, no, of course we don't. Why? Well, the exegesis is, the situation Paul was writing to in the world at the time. And then what principles do we learn from that today, and how do we apply that today? So very much the whole process of the exegesis and hermeneutics is alive in really every stage, from my Bible reading, my personal application, reading for the church, reading for sermons, and then also kind of listening to others as well. But what's brilliant about the first one, How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth, and then the sequel here, How to Read the Bible Book by Book, is that it helps you to develop some of the principles of understanding the way you hermeneutically apply historical references or historical books in the Bible is different to the way you may apply or you would apply poetry scriptures or apocalyptic scriptures, prophetic scriptures. They have a different way of understanding, interpreting, and applying. And so what these books do is they actually break it down to make it simple for every reader to understand. Oh, okay, I read the book of Revelation different to the way I read the Psalms of Ascents, or I read Song of Solomon's, or I read Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3. And so that really does help shape somebody who's reading the Bible to better understand and apply it to today. Brilliant books, accessible for all ages as well. Definitely not just for academics and not just for students, Bible college students, master's students like yourself. It's applicable for all Christians.
Yeah, I certainly found reading the first one, How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth, just how accessible it was. It wasn't sort of, high scholarly language that was difficult to understand. It was very accessible. I think it brings up some really brilliant points around how we read the scriptures, because I think there's so many times we have to recognize our own 21st century Western eyes that are on the text. And actually, when we dive into the word, like you said in 1 Timothy, there's all sorts of stuff that's going on that Paul was writing to Timothy about in the say mid-50s AD. There's the Artemis cult. I actually managed to go to Ephesus recently, and you get to see all the various things, and just seeing what the actual life was like and how they lived. It just completely changes. So it completely changes the meaning of the text. Not to do away from what has been taught over the years in terms of Orthodox Christianity, but it gives you a depth of understanding that helps you to appreciate and to apply it so much better. So I found it really helpful just for my own reading and me figuring stuff out. And I think for ministers listening to this, I think everyone, there's so many, especially these kind of hot topic discussions, we're all trying to work out how do we put them into a format for today that that's understandable, and how do we wrestle with some of these really difficult passages and actually understanding the context of where these things were taking place, diving into the situation of life that these were taking place is just invaluable.
Yeah, it's invaluable because what it does is it's like a measuring rule for us to stop us going into the land of crazy, to stop us, from going in the land of creating cults and different things like that. The exegesis and hermeneutic is such an important aspect for us. And I think what it does is once you understand the context, then it does create safety in a modern day as well. Because what we can do is we can look at the world and think, wow, the world is going crazy. When we talk about all the hot topics today that we're facing in local churches and the pressures that are being placed upon the Christian church to conform to new cultural norms in society. When you actually understand the occasion for which many of the books were written, the letters, why they were written, you realize what Solomon said is true. There's nothing new under the sun. So the Bible actually has more answers for current day questions than what we realize. And we get that by doing a really good hermeneutic and exegesis. So yeah, definitely worth reading.
Yeah, and we ask questions of the text that actually end up missing the point. You're thinking about book by book. Take a book like Jonah, and we were always wondering, was there really a whale, or what size fish must this have been? And it completely misses the point of the text of actually what the book of Jonah is trying to say. And actually, when we dive into that and kind of take off some of our probably their enlightenment glasses, really, where we're asking the scientific questions, how did that happen, but actually really deal with the text for what it's trying to say to us. It actually means that we can get out of some of those conversations that are less helpful and really engage with what it's really trying to say. And then you take a book like Jonah, it suddenly just opens up a whole new world of meaning for today about how we think about people that maybe we don't like, the Ninevites, in the book of Jonah. Well, who are the Ninevites for us today? That's something that we can really wrestle with. So I think, it helps us take off those kind of like enlightenment thinking glasses, I think, for sure.
It does. And the whole idea that we're more enlightened than another generation is such a misnomer as well, because, over years gone by, there have been golden ages of understanding and academia and Bible understanding. And I think the beautiful thing about How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth is it places each book in context with the book of books, the Bible, the 66 books. And so even when you come to the narrative on Jonah and the whale, for those who put on their enlightenment glasses and scientifically begin to think, well, how could Jonah live in the belly of a fish for 3 days and all these sorts of things? How big was that fish, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When you put that in context with the rest of Scripture, you realize, okay, for example, God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days. Let there be, and there was. If he can do that, then he can certainly make a man survive in the belly of a fish for 3 days. So contextually, you begin to realize in isolation, some of those problematic passages for some, in context with the whole, makes you go, okay, maybe not so difficult after all. And yeah, so context is everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with you on that point. So that is How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth by Glyn Sophia, and the part 2, which is How to Read the Bible book by book. So
Correct.
yeah, definitely worth recommending getting that book. Should we go on to your second resource? What's your second one?
Okay, so my second resource, I read it some years ago, and it actually helped to articulate actually what I was already experiencing in the world of ministry, and especially in the context of preaching. So one of the things I find is that in preaching in my local church week in, week out, very much the role of a pastor is that of a spiritual guide, spiritual coach, a discipler. You know, your job really as the pastor is to create the foundations in being a guardian of the faith, to make sure that the depth is built within the house. The deeper the foundations, the taller the building. So we get that. And I found that actually over the years, I was enjoying the way I preached out of the house more than I was enjoying the way I preached in the house. And I think my analogy for when I travel to preach is this: is when I travel to preach, my role is, in a sense, to punch windows into a building to create light, to illuminate a subject. But the depth of that you need to build week in, week out means that your sermon preparation and your style of delivery is different. I think every homiletics course will probably highlight 7, 8, maybe even 10 different styles of preaching that every preacher should be aware of, and we should learn how to step into from time to time. So this book is really the book that really summarizes the way that I preach when I'm outside the house, and also when I'm wanting to introduce a subject into the life of our church. I would definitely use this model. And the book is called Communicating for a Change by Andy Stanley. And it's a brilliant book because what it really does is it really talks more so about the narrative style of preaching. He shapes every sermon on the basis of doing 5 things. He talks about the me, the we, the God, the you, and the we. So the me is, here's what I've experienced in my life. Here's what I faced this week. Here's what happened to me when I was a child. The we brings everybody in and says, we're all in the same boat. We've all had experiences like this. The God is where we get to the Bible. Here's how God speaks into this situation. The you is, if you do this, then this can change your life. And the we is, if we all engage with this, we can change the world. And one of the things that he really, really highlights in this book is this whole idea of getting away from the 3-point sermons that maybe we were taught in Bible college 20 and 30 years ago, that we were taught even 3-point alliteration. But he really talks about the power of one simple, hard crafted thought, one simple thought, one thought that we just keep coming back to as we preach. It may be a tagline, it may be a sticky thought. It's just one thought that when you finish, you pray, you even have a ministry time, that when you leave, people cannot escape that one thought that you kept coming back to. So when I read this book some years ago, I thought, gosh, that's actually what I'm instinctively doing when I travel. And maybe that's why I enjoy that style a little bit more. It probably fits my style of communication a lot more than maybe expository messages or biographical messages even. So it's an excellent book. He talks about 7 things. He says, determine your goal, pick a point, create a map, internalize the message, engage your audience, find your voice, and start all over. So the book is Communicating for a Change by Andy Stanley. and excellent book for preachers, actually.
Yeah, it's a book I've read as well, which is a great book that's just really illuminating in terms of, I think I grew up listening to 3-point sermons, I think like everyone else did. And when you hear him talk about just go to 1 point, I think there's a power to that we don't understand in that you think, well, surely 3 points must be better than 1 because we're giving people more information and we're giving people, but actually it's thinking about it from the point of view of the listener, that actually
Yeah,
everyone remembers. You're not going to remember 3 things, but you'll remember 1 thing. And if you can
yeah,
hone that really, that 1 thing really well, then everyone can go away remembering what's the real core thing here. How is that that process? Is that a process that you use today, or a form of it? What were you preaching like beforehand in church, and how is it now? How have you seen the impact of that?
yeah. So we definitely currently use it in the context of our church now. Historically, I would do definitely a 3-point sermon, but every point would have an illustration and application. So it'd be point, illustrate, applicate, point, illustrate, apply, and things like that. When I was traveling to preach, I would never do that. It would just be one thought. And but what we do now in the life of our church is this: is we actually prepare our sermons in church in a collaborative sense. So what we do at different points in the year is we'll create an executive summary for a sermon series that we are doing. And what will happen is this: we will get our senior team around the table who will create this sermon executive summary for a sermon series. And then different preachers will then collaborate on the message and follow the pattern of me, we, God, you, we. So the idea is this: as an example, Chris, I could be preaching in, for example, 3 weeks' time, and I may not have been in the sermon collaboration meeting, but the preachers have collaborated on this message, followed that spine of me, we, God, you, we, and presented to me a message that is 60 or 70% already thought through and already done, in the context of they will find relevant Bible passages. They will use search for current illustrations, whether that be in the media, the news, stories that they've heard about that we can corroborate, etc., etc. And that will be presented to me as the preacher in 3 weeks' time with the spine already having been created. And then my job is to take that 60, 70% of the work that's already done and put the 30% of, the Holy Spirit breathing on me in the message. Ian Bounds talks about the preacher preaching hot. So you can't effectively copy a sermon and preach it hot. It's got to be part of who you are. And so when Andy Stanley talks about internalizing the message, it's about taking the 60, 70% of the work that's been done, the Bible verses that have been found, illustrations, the outline, and then me bringing the Holy Spirit in me hot, the other 30%, so that I can then shape the message so it looks and sounds like me and the Holy Spirit in me. The idea with this is that because we have 7 locations of our church now, it means that in 3 weeks' time, every location will get the same idea of the sermon, the same sticky thought. But really, if you're in Cardiff listening to our preacher versus if you're in our North Manchester location, if you're in both, you'd say, oh, it's similar, but it's not the same. And the reason is because we're bringing the same truth, but we're bringing it from the individual nuances of each preacher, because there's scope as well for each preacher to bring their own revelation within the context of the passage. So we definitely use this outline in our church and have been doing it probably for the last 7 years, I think, just to help everybody get on the same page. So when we collaborate over our initial stages of sermon prep, everybody knows the map that we're following in order to get to the outcome, the end point of the message. So yeah, it's very important in the life of our church, actually.
I think it's really fascinating to hear about your collaborative style that you use at Audacious, and I think that's actually really brilliantly refreshing to hear, because I think sometimes we can think that preaching is very much it's me reading the words and then putting it out, and actually realizing that actually there's the collaboration can bring something out that that, I mean, you don't bypass that, you and the word time, you and God time, but actually bringing it into a group context and working that out and helping people. It also helps you to be able to sort of box clever, really, and especially in a multi-site context. But I think for ministers with a single church site, it can really help bring other people into the mix and help them think about how they can develop new leaders and new preachers as well. So there's a lot of wins to that kind of style, and having a format that you can utilize, because otherwise it can be it can be difficult. You have a meeting where you all get together, think about ideas, but there's no way to kind of put that into a format. So having this kind of me, we, God, you, we format really can be very, very helpful. So it seems like it's been sort of very impactful for your church as well.
Yeah, without a doubt. We made a decision when we went multi-site that we did not want to, that I didn't just want me to be the preacher or my wife, because what our country actually needs is more preachers, not less preachers. And so what the collaboration process does is it allows more people to be exposed to the whole process of preparation, how you formulate a sermon, how you put things together, so that actually what we're doing is we're actually giving other people the confidence in the preparation process so that they too can be trained as preachers. So they may not be ready to get up on stage yet, but by literally having them in the room, it actually is developing and discipling more preachers, down the line. I think also as well that I definitely had to reach a point where I had to get over my pride, the pride that says, no, I've got to do the wrestling. I've got to do all the working out myself. I guess I had a moment when I realized God put me in community, to be in community, so that we can actually bring each other's gifts and talents to make a better overall whole. Church just me is not good, but church with me and us together, working together, is a much stronger equation. So sometimes we're able to call each other out in the theology. We're able to sit and wrestle with ideas and go, actually, what do we actually think about this? And we're able to work out theology in community, which is very, very strong, I think. And I think that process just gives the whole team a greater measure of confidence that they too can preach, that there's scope for us to grow together stronger. And then on top of that, when we're looking at the busyness of life now, I will be preaching probably 4 or 5 times a week. And so, plus I'm leading the church, plus I'm leading Assemblies of God, plus I'm involved in the doctorate programs, a myriad of things. How long does it actually take to prepare a sermon? Well, gosh, how long's a piece of string? Sometimes it can be, 2 hours. Sometimes you're drawing on ideas that you've already studied in the past, and it can take 10 minutes. And sometimes you wrestle for 3 or 4 days. But what do you do when you're preaching 4, 5 times a week in conferences and seminars and sessions and different things like that? So you actually need to rely on the brothers and sisters that God's put in your world to help you break the back of some things. And once I got over myself and my pride and the historicity of, no, we need to do it ourselves, and what that meant to me personally, I've definitely found that my output is greater because of collaboration, and our output is greater because of collaboration.
Yeah, that's great. Well, so that's Communicating for a Change by Andy Stanley. Should we go on to your final resource? What's the final one that you got?
Okay, so brace yourselves, everybody, because this is not a Christian author. It's not a Christian book, but I read this book in 2002, and it really was a brilliant book. It's called The Art of Possibility by Ben and Rosamund Zander. He is or was at that time, the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra and a professor at the New England Conservatory of Music. And it's just such a brilliant, refreshing book. It was at the time, and even now it's still really current, even though, we're over 2 decades away from it being written. He talks about, inviting people into the realm of possibility, what can be accomplished. And each chapter in so many ways is actually so insightful, so brilliant. It's an easy read, but it's really profound. And I think that even though I think from memory there may be 1 or 2 swear words in it, for which I apologize in advance if you are going to read it, but I know you're a mature audience and you can handle it. But there's one particular chapter where he talks about giving people an A. And I just wonder if I could just read a segment from the book, if that's okay, Chris, if that's not
Go
too
for it.
problematic for the podcast. But he really talks about students, and he says to the students at the start of his semester, at the start of class, he says, I want you to write a letter to me for 12 months' time, telling me why you deserve an A. He said, I'm going to give you an A at the beginning of the year, but I want you to tell me why you deserve the A. And so he graded all the students as an A. And then at the end of the year, he would invariably reach a point where the students would write him a letter. So let me just read this section. He said, a few weeks into the first year of the Giving the A experiment, I asked the class how it had felt to them to start the semester off with an A before they had to prove themselves in any way. To my surprise, a Taiwanese student put up his hand. Apart from a natural diffidence to speak up in a foreign language, it's rare for students from Asia, often among our most accomplished performers, to volunteer to speak in class. A few of the Asian students have tried to explain to me why this is so. In some Asian cultures, a high premium is traditionally put on being right. The teacher is always right, and the best way for students to avoid being wrong is to not say anything at all. So when this young student raised up his hand quite enthusiastically, of course, I called on him. In Taiwan, he explained, I was number 68 out of 70 students. I come to Boston and Mr. Zander says that I am an A. It's very confusing. I walk about 3 weeks, very confused. I'm number 68 out of 70, but Mr. Zander says I am an A student. I am number 68, but Mr. Zander says I am an A. One day I discovered I'm much happier being an A than being number 68. So I decided that I am an A. And he says this student, in a brilliant flash, had hit upon the secret of life. He realized that it's all invented, it's all a game. The number 68 is invented, and the number A is, and the A is invented. So we might as well choose to invent something that brightens our life and the lives of people around us. So in it, he talks about the need, how we should give ourselves an A, let ourselves off the hook from all the things that our hang-ups, our, the things that we feel we're not good at, etc. And he says, and certainly when we see other people, rather than judging by appearance, by dress, by the way they speak, what would it look like if we just gave everybody an A? We actually gave people the benefit of the doubt. And lots of great insight like that through the book is really, really brilliant.
That's fantastic. How does that work out practically for you, giving, how do you give your leaders an A, and how does that look like, and how have they responded?
Well, I think it's one of those things where we're easy to jump to conclusions about things. I remember back in my last church, I was a youth pastor. I had heard that, and let me change names just to keep the person secret. I'd heard that Michelle had done something that she shouldn't have done. And so I got Michelle into the office, and I'd been schooled in the that's the way you tell people off. And so the person sat there, and what they'd done was pretty bad. And so I was like, why did you do? I can't understand it. Why would you do this, etc. And Michelle tried to speak up, and I said, no, let me finish. And she tried to speak up again. And I cut her up. No, let me finish. Until finally, after me going on a verbal rampage for 10 minutes, I said, what do you say to yourself? And she looked at me, she says, Pastor Glyn, I'm really sorry, but you've got the wrong Michelle. It wasn't me. So I had jumped to conclusions about the whole thing. And, then of course I had to eat humble pie. I had to apologize. And I'd learned my lesson. And when I got the other Michelle into the room and she explained exactly what happened, I realized that 1 and 1 in this instance had definitely made 3. And, definitely it was a case of going, hang on a minute, let's take benefit of the doubt in this. Let's not jump to conclusions. Let's actually hear the full story before we make a conclusion about a person. So, I would hope that I give people an A. I'm sure that I don't always do that, but definitely I think the church would be a much more gracious place, and the world would be way more gracious if we just learned to give people an A. I think it flies in the face of cancel culture, and it's probably a secular version of really what the gospel is.
Well, this is exactly what I was thinking when you were saying about that. I was thinking, when you're talking about giving people an A, and I just think, well, that's exactly what Jesus has done for us. We haven't done anything to deserve it. We haven't earned it yet, but he's given us the A that is salvation. And so, and I think that, the work out your salvation with fear and trembling is I want to live up to that. I want to live up to that, what Christ has done for me. So I think that, but that straight away then goes into how we lead, doesn't it? Because then we can very often fall into that trap of going, oh, but I don't live in the way that Christ has, if Christ has given me an A, I don't often give other people an A in the same way. I kind of think, oh, you got to earn it. You got to, earn my trust and those kind of things. But actually, maybe we need to give people a bit of an A. It's a truly Christian thought there to really think through.
Yeah, it is. And I think, I think a lot of the time we actually dwell in hypocrisy, because what we do is we judge other people by their actions, but we want people to judge us by our intentions. And I think the gap between those two things are huge. So maybe rather than just piling on people's actions, understanding the why behind the what, would just taking the space to breathe rather than just jump at things, I think would make a much better world for us.
Yeah, absolutely. You could imagine if we all judged people by their intentions, and then had that conversation first, and then how much more productive those kind of conversations would be, especially when they've got to be difficult conversations. So certainly that giving people an A is a great thought, and certainly something I think for every minister is going to have pastoral situations where actually, what happens if I what if I thought about people's motivations before I thought about just merely their actions? And because you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
We want that of us, don't we? We want to be judged by our motivations, not by our actions. So yeah. Fantastic. So that is the Art of Possibility by Ben, and is it Rosamund Zander? Ben and Rosamund Zander.
Ben and Rosamund Zander. And if you just go on YouTube and you type in the Art of Possibility Ben Zander, you'll see some short, I think he does a 10-minute TED Talk, which is actually brilliant. And it'll definitely whet everyone's appetite for that book. So worth the read.
And my guess is that you could probably eat a really good banoffee pie whilst you watch that TED Talk, would be my guess.
100% you could, yeah. As long as you cook it right.
Yeah, I don't know how you'd read a book and eat a banoffee pie at the same time, but that you can get over that. I think we can still do it. It's still possible.
I'll show you how you do it. You hold the book in one hand, and then you just get a spoon with a dish in the other. That's it.
Fantastic. Pastor Glyn, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it. The 3 resources are fantastic. Recommend them for every minister listening to this. It's going to be really, really helpful, and absolutely love banoffee pie as well. So thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Chris.